Hello together, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome from Berlin. We are very excited to host this TV show, Next Gen Eco, together with an amazing guest, Yat Siu, and an amazing co-host, our very own Kim Dinse. We are very excited within the Next Gen Eco TV show to discover innovation, technology, how that blends in to sustainability, and listen from amazing movers and shakers in that field, how they can support us on educating the masses on Web3 and also share inspiration for the blockchain world in particular. Yat is an amazing figure in the space, has generated and created a lot of value and captured that also with a portfolio company of 500 plus projects. We will be zooming in to our Davos session. Let me first say hello to Kim. Hi.
Hey, thank you, Amir. So I'm really excited about our TV show and having our guest, Yat Siu from Animoca Brands here with us. And I'm particularly curious about the hot questions our AI agent, Lisa, has prepared for our today's conversation.
Amazing. I'm also very excited about that. And yeah, happy to welcome you, Yat. How are you doing? Where are you calling from?
Great. I'm calling from Singapore. It's a great pleasure to be here and looking forward to the conversations. I always am curious what different kind of AIs have in store for questions for myself. So yeah, look forward to knowing what that is.
Very true. Let's start with like some general questions before we zoom into our Davos recording, where we had the chance to interview you during the World Economic Forum. So my two questions to start off would be, how do you see the future of Web3, also in light of developments in other industries and technologies?
Yeah, so it's a pretty big question, but generally speaking, super bullish on Web3. In fact, there was a funny article literally just a couple days ago from Tech in Asia, and the headline was basically that Yat Siu is never going to give up on Web3. And I had sort of this Rick Astley meme, sort of never going to give you up type of thing in my head. And that's basically sort of the mindset I have here. What really excites me about Web3 broadly, and then I can talk a little bit how I think of it in sort of the near term versus the long term, is that it really democratizes access to really, if you think about it, financial assets. And by democratizing, I don't mean just existing financial constructs. In fact, it creates new financial constructs, right? It makes it possible for things that weren't able to be capital assets, like different forms of, let's call it virtual property rights, where there's gaming items that are now actual capital assets because you actually own that virtual sword or that virtual item, right? That's an example of something that couldn't exist before. Or by tokenizing real world assets, most people think about tokenizing real world assets in terms of things like real estate or perhaps maybe, even stable coins, for instance. However, the real sort of exciting thing, I think, it's about new assets that weren't there before. So a year and a half ago, we tokenized a Stradivarius, which is a really valuable violin. And what's interesting about that is not the fact that it is a valuable violin. It's the fact that now you can make this valuable violin accessible to people interested in that they wouldn't normally be able to afford, right? In fact, I think just earlier this year, a Strad was sold for over $22 million, which is great. However, the problem is that for a regular musician who might want to own one, they simply can't own a whole one. But again, through tokenization, they could do that. So I see it really as sort of the ability to democratize access to areas of financial value that normally you couldn't. And the net effect is that you actually become financially more literate. And I think to me, that's a superpower of Web3 in the longer term. So we think one of the biggest problems we have in the world is the fact that the people who have stuff are the capital class, which understands financial literacy, they understand money, and they know basically sort of how to create returns. And then we have the rest of the world, which is the majority, which is, let's call it the 90+%, which is mostly in what you would traditionally call the labor class. And they don't understand investing. They were grown up thinking about that it's, work is important. It is important. But essentially, they never treated and understood money. And you said you said you're calling in from Berlin. Well, I a little backstory. I grew up in Austria a long time ago, but in fact, I used to go to Berlin a lot because I'm a little bit older here. So I used to remember what it was like for the Wende. And so my mom used to work at the eastern side of Berlin, at the Komische Oper. So I went there on the other side and I saw what that world was like. But you might appreciate this. In Germany, you don't grow up learning about money. We don't teach that. In fact, the general expression I would have is that it's looked down. I guess it's generally verpönt, if you were taking the German word for it, right? So which is a shame, because the whole world works around money. The entire ecosystem works around money. But we don't teach this to our children, so we don't know anything about it. And so why are we surprised that there's a world that's divided between the people who understand it and the people who don't? So how do we teach that? And I think what's powerful about blockchain is it combines areas of passion and interest, but with a financial layer. So if you're a gamer, suddenly you can now learn about the world of finance, which is what we saw in the Philippines. If you're a musician, you can now learn about the world of finance because maybe you could own a piece of a strat. They don't care about Bitcoin, even though it's important, but they do care about a strat, right? Remember what it was like when you went to school. You would learn things better if you were interested in it. If you weren't interested in it, you can't, it won't work, right?
Very
So
true.
it's the same, yeah. So it's the same thing. So we think the real end goal and the real sort of democratizer and opportunity is that we become much more financially literate. Now, just imagine if most of the world is actually financially literate and understands money. That to us actually is going to really change the world, right? And that's basically what I think is the superpower of Web3. And I think that's how we do a service. Which brings me to the final point around what's so exciting around generally Web3, which is tokenization. So we think the whole world will be tokenized. Everything will be tokenized. In fact, we think of tokens as kind of the new website. But what makes it so powerful is that tokens represent ownership of the networks or the services that you want to represent. And when you have ownership in something, again, they have the potential to have capital value because now you're attached and connected to it. And I take this as an example often with sort of existing companies. For instance, Apple, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, maybe the biggest one right now, worth trillions of dollars, has, maybe 500 million or 1 billion customers in the world, something crazy like that. How many of them are shareholders in Apple? A very tiny number, right?
Yeah.
Almost nobody who buys an Apple product is a shareholder. How many people who use Facebook or Instagram are shareholders in them? Almost none. Very, very tiny figure. I think the total shareholders, I think of I think Apple and Facebook is something like 80 to 100,000, right? And sure, some of them are mutual funds, but the point is, it's a small single-digit percentage or smaller of the entire population that's using it. And there's a couple of very impractical reasons behind it. One of them is that it would be very difficult to have basically 1 billion shareholders in a company. You just can't do it. The administration doesn't work. But you can have 1 billion token holders. And that's how we think we can create a much more fairer world, because essentially we add value to the network, but we don't own a piece of it. And through tokenization, we can. And so we think of that as essentially another form of democratizing access, creating a more democratic access to networks that we actually create value in, and that we should have a piece and own a piece in. And that we think is how the future of Web3 is going to be. Obviously, it's a long road ahead. That's what we're building for. That's what you guys are building for. And we think it's going to create a better world.
Thanks a lot, Yat, for sharing your gold nuggets over here. I think the points of access, of ownership, and also of education, not only in the world of digitalization, but in financial terms, is something, very, incredible in its impact. Like, I myself got a much deeper understanding of finances, although I'm a business student, when dealing with blockchain technology at the intersection of finance, technology, and then blending into ownership. Yet, before we zap over to the Davos interview, where we will be drilling more into more details, the second question I have for you for today is, whom would you love to see on this TV show? Whom do you think would inspire and educate the listeners who might not know too much about Web3 technology and innovation?
Well, there's a lot, right? So I would say, can I only mention one?
No.
But yeah. So I don't know who else you've had on the show. There's so many. But obviously, if you bring in someone like CZ, that is, super successful, and he's also actually trying to do something in education, with Giggle. So I would say he'd be a great candidate. But of course, the other one is a little bit more philosophical, but also important. Someone like Vitalik, would be great as well if you haven't brought them on sort of on board. I would say, there's so many, but if you haven't had either of these two on the show, certainly you should try and get them if you can.
Thanks a lot for sharing, Yat. We'll definitely reach out to them and hope to have a joint victory here for our viewers and the TV show. Yeah, after delving into the Davos interview. Good morning here from Davos, World Economic Forum 2025. We're super excited to be here and are very honored to have Yat Siu, a person who needs no introduction in the Web3 world. But as we have viewers from the non-Web3 world, we are looking forward to dive into who you are, what you have been building, and what inspires you to do what you do.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Yat Siu. I'm chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. We're a company that today actually has over 540 portfolio companies in Web3, but we're not just an investor, we're actually a builder in the space. We employ over 1,000 people worldwide, basically building products and services. And today, basically as a business, we are probably one of the largest Web3 conglomerates, both in revenue in terms of asset size, in terms of helping build the space. And we think Web3 will change the world, and we think tokenization will change the world.
Thanks a lot for the short introduction. You're admired by the Web3 community for your different achievements. Now, usually you're at the receiving end of an elevator pitch. But today we would love to hear a short elevator pitch on Animoca Brands and perhaps also a portfolio company, maybe even Mocaverse, to share with the viewers.
Yeah, so I mean, without going into a specific elevator pitch on Animoca Brands, we kind of represent in many ways the Web3 space as a whole because we're so broadly invested. And so our mission is digital property rights. And so we really believe that the future will be better if we all own a stake in the networks that we help construct. So when you think today, for instance, if you're an Uber driver, you don't have a share in Uber, but yet you drive the cars and you actually add value to the Uber network. What happens when AI basically takes over the cars and they drive everything? All those Uber drivers are shafted, they own nothing. But imagine if the Uber driver actually becomes a shareholder in Uber and through the many years of service has a stake in that network. Then he won't care that an AI will actually build a business because it will be better for him. He can retire. He will be an equity holder in the structure and things will be better. Now, there are about, 500 million people who use Apple products. There's about billions of people who use Android products. None of them own the sort of the networks that they help construct. How many people use Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok? How many of the users actually own anything in network? Basically zero. Right? And that's actually why we have concentration of wealth the way that it is. And that's why we have problems in society. Tokenization solves this because actually what happens in the world of tokenization, everyone can be a stakeholder. How many people own Bitcoin? How many people own Ethereum or Solana or Mocaverse for that matter? Meaning that you can build a kind of network economy that is shared across everyone because everyone has equity ownership, meaning that they have property rights, which is not in violation of any kind of capitalist and freedom standard, right? Because the solution that people are thinking about today is around, well, okay, we have to distribute wealth fairly. So this is where a socialist element comes into central control, saying, you should have this, you should have this, I decide you should have this. Because we don't have a way of distributing the value in a manner that is commensurate to the service because of the abstraction of capital and labor. But in tokenization, you can do that. And tokenization in Web3 is really a new wealth class because of that. Right? And so what we're trying to do with Mocaverse, which is one of our projects of the 540 that we have in the group, is around solving one of the biggest problems we have, which is digital identity and reputation. Now, we can have a digital identity, but one of the values of digital identity is worthless without reputation. So if you know my name, that's great. But if I don't know your background, no difference, right? I'm here because of your reputation or your reputation. You're talking to me because I have a reputation. If I'm someone that's anonymous, that may have a name, I wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have a conversation and you couldn't trust me. And that's actually how economies work. The largest economies in the world, the ones that have best GDP, have the highest level of interpersonal trust. If I go to a shop and give you money to get some bread, and I know that you're not going to just take it, that works. It's surprising how many places in the world you can't do that, where you can just go there and give someone money freely and he'll give you the service you expect. But in the places like in Switzerland where you can do that, we have a thriving economy because we can have interpersonal trust. And that's what we need in Web3, and that's what Mocaverse is solving as the reputation layer, meaning that we can attest reputation towards other people of what they've done. One of our problems in Web3 is civil attacks. Basically, people are just, we're big supporters of the Ton ecosystem. We've gained tens of millions of users from the network, only to find that 70 to 80% of them are basically bots. Why? Because there's money involved. So how do we solve it? Reputation. I will only transact with the kind of wallets and users that have a good reputation. And this is basically what will then ultimately open up, we think, the holy grail, which is unsecured credit. The reason why Web3 is so focused on over-collateralization is because the trust is how much money I've put on stake. But how do I do it in another way in the real world? We have unsecured credit. You go and get a credit card. You don't need to have the cash in the bank because I know your reputation, right? When I go for a job, I don't have to post collateral to go for the job. I'm hired based on your reputation, right?
Yeah.
When I make an investment in a seed startup, I invest on your reputation, not because you have money. In fact, you're coming to us because you need money. So again, we're all in the reputation space. I think reputation is the biggest currency, most important currency in the world. It's also interesting, the one thing that once you have it, you don't want to lose it. And interestingly enough, also, you use money and capital to defend it. Right. So I think that's the way that we make Web3 better. And, there's many projects like Open Campus with education as well that we love as well. And, trying to solve student loans and DeFi. But I would say, Mochaverse and what we're trying to solve with reputation is probably a base layer thing that we now need to make Web3 a safer space.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for this amazing knowledge spill. Like, very interesting point you're touching upon, from like Web2 data giants replacing oil companies as the most powerful companies, but not in a plus sum game as we can achieve in tokenization. Also, the model of actually having consumers shifting to prosumers, becoming stakeholders into the
Owners.
networks.
They become owners.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's like an amazing concept, something which fascinated me personally. So thanks a lot for working on those solutions over here and pushing the space forward.
Sure. I mean, I think the other thing, all brands in the future will need ownership as a level of giving more love to the brand.
Yeah, with each purchase, perhaps.
Exactly. Well, because what happens is that when you become an owner in something, your relationship completely changes. I mean, just imagine what it's like when you're renting your home and when you own your home. Logically, it shouldn't make much sense that you invest more in the home that you own. But yet we spend more on the furniture, we paint the walls, we make sure the toilets look good, we do all this stuff. We rent a place, we put some minimum effort, maybe some bit more, but we don't invest in much, even though it may not necessarily be the best capital investment, because there's a sense of love and connection that happens when you have ownership. And I think this is a very deeply rooted human thing. And now if you as a brand can deliver ownership, which is kind of what we saw in the first wave of NFTs and we can see through tokenization, then actually that network effect that you build is super powerful. And this is the other thing I would say. Most people don't understand tokens because they think of it in terms of, like people from Web2 look at a token and say, oh, it's a cryptocurrency, right? But actually, the currency aspect, what we really think of it, is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to express a social network, which is a network effect that has a financial layer attached to it. And so this is actually what we're seeing. We're seeing these constructions of the network effect. So when you see tokens become valuable, they're indications of the power of the network effect, not indications of some kind of P multiple or value, which is why it's so hard. One of the reasons why we're here in Davos is trying to explain to people, what is a token? Because it's difficult, right? Because they're used to thinking of it in an equity construct. Yet in tokens, both the utility and the financial network effect are tied into one.
Yes, no, definitely. Like, the very interesting fact about like crypto or this technology is the intertwining with the financial world. So that's something, truly fascinating. So, if we want to describe Web3, like maybe to say one sentence beforehand, I think tokenization, to explain that, is nothing else than digitalization in the secure blockchain world tied with the financial world. So as we have like a few viewers over here, which will not be very well expertise around blockchain technology, what is a short summary of Web3, of blockchain technology? What is a short summary of Web3, of blockchain technology? What is Web3, Yat?
So, I mean, the very simplest way I like to express Web3 is that it is the web of ownership. That's really what it is, right? And when they say, well, what am I owning? You're owning effectively a network effect. That's basically what a token represents. The token represents the network effect. So that's, when you think of it, it's the unlocking of a network effect that we couldn't have before. So when you think of the type of classical instruments, when you think about property rights, the fact that we allowed property rights as a way for people to own stuff that they can sell and trade unlocked a whole economy of essentially merchants that basically became more powerful than the lords of their time and basically created wealth distribution of unprecedented scale, which is why centralized sort of feudal economies basically had to make way for more democratic community constructions because, again, of that common ownership that started happening. But then we had limits in common ownership because what happened was that only a small number of people, relatively speaking, could have the concentration of that ownership. As a result of that, what's the next paradigm and where ownership can be more widely distributed? It's a new type of asset. It's a network asset. It's an asset that basically is represented through tokenization. Now, the other way to think about it is the expression of intellectual property. Intellectual property is actually another form of a network asset, which didn't happen hundreds of years ago. And when we had intellectual copyright protection, that's when we had things like music and film and art and other forms that expressed. These are actually, when you think about it, intangible goods. So we've already moved away. Even software is patented and trademarked.
Yeah.
These are intangible. They're not something that I can hold like a piece of real estate. They're actually virtual in construction, and they have a value. And because of the fact that I could protect it, I can monetize that effect, right? That's what intellectual property rights did. If we didn't have that, there would be no music industry. The next level of that is basically tokenization of these other areas that didn't have the value to have this kind of intellectual property rights protection. So for instance, if music was not making millions of dollars, the whole legal framework of hiring lawyers and conveyancing and all that kind of stuff wouldn't be worth it. So you can't protect it. But there's a lot of value in assets that are maybe making only $100 a year. And if you can think of it as a capital asset, $100 a year yield is worth $500 or $1,000 in a market that has capital formation. But you can't do that when the whole cost is more than $100 to do that. In fact, it will cost tens of thousands of dollars to protect the intellectual property of something that makes only $100 a year. In blockchain, through an NFT, $1, you're done. Yeah. So that means a teacher which is what we're doing with Open Campus, a teacher that might only make $50 a year on a piece of content he or she creates, can now sell it for $250 to $500. In places like Venezuela, where the average income of a teacher is $15 to $20, that is life-changing, right? And we have teachers in America that are making $50,000 to $100,000, and their annual teacher income is $20,000 because they make content that makes $10,000 a year, and it's worth something because of 15 or 20% yield somewhere else. So there's a whole unlocking of capital value of things that are already valuable that couldn't be possible because we had limitations in our legal frameworks that are now possible in a distributed ledger technology that essentially creates this permissionless trust where I know for sure. The same way that if someone takes your Bitcoin, you can now prove that was my Bitcoin. So I can go to a court and claim it back if someone took it. That type of sort of evidence wasn't possible in the digital world, but now with the blockchain you can.
Yes, and like maybe to add on that, as you touched already, the disintermediation, allowing peer-to-peer transactions, and actually like the value capturing of the producers of the IP in this case, is also a very promising.
And it also removes
advantage.
Intermediary and shares much more fair value, right? Because the intermediary is either the platform, which is the cost of gas, which is basically not even 1% often, or a platform that might charge you 1 or 2%. Intermediaries today charge 30 to 50, up to 70%, right? As agents, as networks, as platforms, right? That value distributed more directly to the end users is also, by the way, much better because it's the same thing when you think about economies. What's the lifeblood of all economies? It's actually SMEs, right? Yeah. And to make sure that SMEs grow, you need to have that value distribute more sort of across. How do you do that? By making sure that platforms don't rake the kind of fees that they do. Yeah. The biggest companies in the world, the top 10 in the world, have over $1 trillion of cash, right? Mostly, by the way, sitting in Ireland, right? And what does this cash do? It compounds. Completely unproductive capital, which I understand why governments are trying to solve this, but they've got smarter lawyers, so they're going to figure it out. Yeah. But again, this is why blockchain solves it. I think of blockchain as kind of this sort of revolution, as an sort of a counter-reaction to what's happening in Web 2. And it started as a counter-reaction to the financial world, but it's now become a counter-reaction to everything that's wrong in Web 2.
Most definitely. Thanks for sharing your vision of Web3. We totally agree that Web3 is here to stay and actually to disrupt across different industries. Also, thanks for sharing about Animoca as well as Mocaverse on the example of how identification, how reputation is of great importance. And we should take ownership. Now's the time. Now we have the tools. Maybe to round up, I've got like a few more questions, 2 more actually. First of all, share a little bit about who you are, what inspired you to become who you became. I'm sure the viewers are, looking and into themselves actually if they want to become an entrepreneur, if this is something, which they are called for. So perhaps you can share like a little bit about yourself and maybe some, interesting moments.
I'll try to keep it brief. I would say that, every experience that I've had in the past shapes who I am today. So that means that I don't have a retrospective perspective of, I wish I did this, I wish I did that. Because if I did something differently, I would turn out maybe differently in one form or the other, right? That's just kind of one perspective. How I grew up, therefore, shaped my thinking about the world. I grew up in Austria in the 70s and 80s, which was basically during a time during the Cold War, right? So we still had the Iron Curtain. And my mom was an artist, and she was a starving artist. So I got some appreciation of why I shouldn't be an artist, but also problems about the world around the fact that my mom was not financially literate. And she ended up working for a fair bit of time at the Komische Oper, as well as in Leipzig, which was on the Eastern Bloc. So I would visit her, as a child. So that gave me a pretty indelible sort of view of the world at the time when I was going cross-border, seeing literally what the West and what the East would look like, which gave me a very clear perspective of what I don't want. Basically, communism was
Fair
bad.
enough, yeah.
But then afterwards, because I had I started working for Atari, went to Detect, I went to America, and then I saw capitalism, and you should 90s and some sort of America, although in a recession, was still a very uber capitalistic place. And then I came to Hong Kong, and that was like Milton Friedman's wet dream. So this place was just completely capitalism rampant. And when I arrived, there was no social security net, right? There were basically elderly people pushing sort of carts, while they were billionaires basically, and I think the highest ratio of Rolls Royces in the world and Rolexes and whatever.
Tiger City,
yeah, exactly. So
reason.
saw the full of these extremes, right? Which I think gave me a perspective as to how do we construct something that is more equitable in a manner that made sense, and shaped my thinking. And for me, the reason why I got so early on in the internet and built one of Hong Kong's first ISPs is that I thought of it as the information equalizer, which it kind of was, right? In the sense that information was no longer sort of something that was sort of locked and exclusive. It was available to all. And that was my attraction about basically building internet, and very much an open source proponent, building an open source and one of the very largest Linux operations back in 1999, right? So that was a long time ago. So all of those shaping and thinking sort of helped sort of think about the space. And so I would say, though, as time evolves, if you build purposefully, in my case, I don't think everyone needs to think about impact the same way, but our motto is building with impact and purpose. So if you build with purpose, whatever it is that you do, then you will kind of get towards it in some form or another. Did I know what I would be doing today, 20 years ago? Absolutely no clue, right? But I did know what I wanted to achieve in a broad context of trying to drive, what I thought would be a more equitable construct for the world in whatever shape or form that would happen. And, through that, I ended up discovering basically blockchain, not because of Bitcoin, but because of NFTs, because I was in the gaming world. And in the gaming world, really, if you think about it, it has, in the initial, no connection to Bitcoin whatsoever. It was a financial instrument, this is entertaining and culture, there would be no connection. And when NFTs came in 2017, that was our entrance into the space. And all these things had to happen, right, for it to happen. So I would say, and by the way, it happened late in my career, right? It wasn't like, there's a lot of people who say, oh, you have to be a young entrepreneur. Sure, you're dynamic and whatever, but life experiences does matter. And I think the sort of ascent of what we're seeing in Web3 and Animoca's sort of a participation in it comes from a collective knowledge and wisdom of what we've gone through over the last 20, 30 years.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. So you've been crossing borders early. You've been crossing different industries and saw the different puzzle pieces coming together. Thanks a lot for your amazing contributions to the space. We're looking forward to have you on a next episode and dive a bit more into a few questions. Thanks a lot, Yat Siu, for taking the time here at Davos.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Very much excited to hand over to Kim. She will take a leading part now in the AI agent hot questions topics of Next Gen Eco.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Yat Siu, for your learnings on this session and also for in Davos about Web3. Very inspiring. And now let us know what are the hot questions from Olisa are. So the first question would be, what would you be doing instead of doing Web3, including gaming and data ownership?
I was always involved in the web in one form or the version. So if it's not Web3, then maybe it would be Web4 or Web5. I don't know, but I would always be doing something in the web of some form.
Okay, so next question would be, what unexpected challenge in building Animoca brand taught you the most valuable lesson, and how has that shaped your leadership approach?
I think the most valuable lesson for me, specifically in Web3, was how everything was so deeply integrated with finance. Now, when we first started building Animoca Brands in the Web3 space with blockchain gaming, we focused on ownership, but it wasn't really until DeFi Summer came that it actually really kicked off. And it was through that approach, and which is why I talk a lot about financial literacy. Even for myself, I would consider myself reasonably financial literate. But the understanding of what happened with DeFi Summer and how it impacted Web3 games, and then generally the entire ecosystem, got, again, to your earlier shared example, a deeper understanding as to sort of the importance and the impact of finance across the space. And so I would say the learning is that you cannot succeed in Web3 if you do not actually understand finance and money.
Thank you so much for these insightful answers. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed, also from my side, I think this was a powerful ending, stressing the importance of finance, of financial freedom, something we all strive for in this world and should be more aware of. Yat, what a pleasure having had you on this TV show episode, and we are super excited to look at the future of Web3, to look at the future of Animoca Brands, and also to look at the future of what Mocaverse means for a reputational layer in our world. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.